Hi again then guys, and welcome to another look back into some of the coolest cars from Forza's past, and once again we're taking a look back at Forza Motorsport 3 for one of the race cars which at the time is fairly easy to overlook, as a couple of the cars in this particular series are, but at the same time it's a car which I don't see a huge amount of people clamouring for a return of. And it is, to be honest, at least for me, a surprise that this car isn't included anymore, seeing as the Forza franchise has pretty much always favoured GT class race cars quite a lot. There are a lot of them on the game, there still are to this day. Even in street racing Forza games like Horizon, you still see those GT class machines, like Porsches and Bentleys, still popping up. So with that in mind, it kind of begs the question why they didn't include this car, the Ferrari 550 GTS, after Forza 3. This isn't on Forza 4 or any of the other games since. That seems strange to me. Now, not only is this car featured on Forza 3, but it's actually featured in three forms. There are two red versions and a blue version, and each of the versions is slightly higher than the next in terms of its PI level. There's a Pro Drive version, for instance, which, if memory serves, I believe Colin McRae actually piloted in the Le Mans, and so the car does have certain driver name recognition, even beyond superfans of GT class racing. Most people, of course, know who Colin McRae is in the petrolhead world. And in terms of what the car's capable of, well, the Ferrari 550 road car is already a really good long-distance GT. Jeremy Clarkson, I believe, at the time called it the best handling car he'd ever driven, so that bodes pretty well for a race car. Plus, the numbers are nice and rounded. Typical race car GT style numbers. 6-litre engine, 600 horsepower, 1100 kilos, 545 horsepower per tonne. Really nice numbers across the board, and of course that's without any tuning from the player. Now, the torque isn't ridiculously high, which isn't uncommon for a Ferrari, but it does put out 483 pound-feet, which is more than enough, and the PI level is the R2 class, not too surprisingly, but very low in the R2 class, 808, and that's in its highest form. The other two are a little bit lower. I believe one is 805 and the other is 803, something like that, or 806, I can't recall, but they're pretty close. And apart from that, the specs aren't any different, it's just the PI level. So that brings us, of course, to how the car actually performs. Because unlike a lot of other Ferrari race cars in the Forza franchise, and in pretty much any racing franchise which features racing Ferraris, it's not a mid-engine car, and of course that gives it a totally different driving style to a typical idea of what you'd expect from a Ferrari race car. This is not a 360, an F430, an Enzo, an FXX. It's not that mid-engine typical Ferrari layout. It's more in the mix with stuff like the 612 Scaglietti or the 575 Maranello. Now, those are great cars as well, they're just great for totally different reasons, and I have to say, for me personally at least, I prefer the style of this as a race car to any of the F430s. Now, the F430s have pretty much always been featured as race cars on Forza, and they're usually pretty good, but at the same time, they're not necessarily overly memorable. You don't see a huge amount of people using them. People tend to go for the alternatives, stuff like Lambos, Maseratis, even Panoz models rather than the F430s. Not that they're bad, of course there are certainly people who do use them, and they're still included now, whereas this one isn't, which is clearly saying something, but at the same time, this is a car with a ton of potential, and it's also a car which definitely doesn't get the recognition from the Forza community which it deserves. Now, I'm sure there are fellow fans such as myself who would love to see this car return, because it's a great race car. But even back when I was playing Forza 3 online on Xbox Live, I didn't see many people using this car. And to be honest, back then I was much younger and I didn't either, but my appreciation for cars was entirely different back then. Now, with that being said, the car being front engine gives it, for sure, a different handling style. But I think it actually benefits the car, because it gives it something much more akin to what you typically expect from, say, a Corvette, like a C5R or C6R, but at the same time it has a more responsive, I would say perkier engine style than something like the V8 or V10 of a Viper, or even a V8 Viper, compared to this. This feels like more of a howler. It likes to be worked hard, it's of course naturally aspirated, Not that most of the others aren't as well, but still, with an engine like a Ferrari or a Lambo, you can tell immediately that it's a naturally aspirated engine. It feels pure. As I said, it is a howler or a screamer, and it feels great. It's a fantastic handling car. The grip level is insane. You can spin up the tyres, and of course you can get the tail out if you push it a bit harder, but at the same time, this is not a difficult car to drive at all. In fact, in the R2 category, although it's not one of the absolute fastest cars in the class, I would say it's probably one of the most forgiving. It's a very easy car to drive. The top end speed can be beaten. You can get it over 200, but at the same time it can be beaten. The acceleration is more than good enough, and of course, with tuning and upgrades, bit longer gearing, for instance, lower downforce, you can make it go quick enough for most tracks, at least against the majority of its rivals. And of course the car lineup of Forza 3 was considerably different to what it is now. So this car was, I would say, more competitive back then than it might be now. Now, as far as this car making a return, unlike a lot of the other cars which I'm going to review for Forza 3 and, say, Forza 2 and Forza 4, I would say there actually is a chance of this one coming back, more so than something like a Seat Cupra GT, or a Chrysler ME412, or a Top Secret Supra. I think that this car actually has a pretty good chance of returning to Forza, unless it has already, but as far as I'm aware, I don't think it has. So I would not be at all surprised if this vehicle did make a comeback, and I would personally be very happy if it did, because although I'm not a huge fan of the 550 or the 575 on the road, I am a fan of the 612, but not the other two. I don't dislike them, they're just not really my thing. As a race car, it really does pull it off well. It looks the part, it sounds the part, and it certainly performs the part. Even though the price tag is 600 grand, which could seem to be pretty expensive, I would definitely say this is a car that's worth checking out in any of its three forms. The obvious one to go for is the highest PI level, but all three of them are very good. So, that's it overall for this particular pick. Of course, I'll see you guys next time, and for now, as always, thanks for watching.